Welcome to Business Tips with Michael Tobian. Today we're going to be talking about picking your business name. Okay, in the last couple of videos, we chatted about deciding what you want to do, picking your business idea, and kind of the mental process you should take when you go through that. We talked about the importance of figuring out how you're going to make money in your business before you implement all your strategies and certainly before you start the business. At some point, you're going to want to pick a business name that's conducive to what you're doing and it's going to match the brand and feel that you are trying to let your customers know. So in some ways, people overthink this, and in some ways, they underthink certain aspects of this. We're going to talk about the ways people underthink their business name to avoid running into problems later. So there are a few considerations when thinking about this. The first one, you need to consider the name availability. So you might have a great name in mind, but somebody else might be using it. There's three different main places that you want to check and make sure that business name is available. The first one is your state website. Or locality, depending on where you're at. The state that you live in will restrict and maintain name availability for people who have licenses or businesses set up in that state. Usually this is through your state website. So if you live in Utah, it's utah.gov. Sometimes it can be difficult to find because these state websites have a lot of links. So if you just do a search, usually, Utah business name availability into Google or a search engine, you can usually pretty easily find that page. And then you go in and you search the name and it'll show you all the businesses that have that name. It should just be one business. They only allow one name per state. That's identical. But you can search different variations of the name and see what other people in your industry or in your state have a similar or the same name that you're looking for. And if the name's already in use, you're going to have to pick something else. Another place you can look is the trademark database. That is a searchable database that's for the U.S. Trademark Office. They have a pretty slick search feature where you can search by just keywords. So you can say, well, I want to see all the trademarks out there that have these words in it. Do a few searches and make sure you're in the clear there. Because if somebody has a trademark, then you may run into problems later with them coming after you because they were using your name first. Another thing to consider is if the name is already in use, but it's not trademarked. So the best way to do that is to look through URLs or do a search on a search engine to see if that name's in use. Because if the name's in use, even though they haven't registered a trademark, you may have to stop using the name some point down the road. If they were using it first, they can send you a cease and desist letter. And if they were using it first, they may win in that dispute. So that's name availability. The second thing you should consider is URL availability. If having a website is important to your business, then you're going to want that URL to be somewhat conducive or have some kind of connection to your business. Some people's URLs are the exact name of their business and some are a little bit of a variation. There's also different end parts of the URL. There's .com, .net, .org, things like that. So there's a lot to consider here. If somebody is if the name of your business is generic terms, then you might run into a problem where somebody actually has your URL even though they don't have that business name. These days, it's very difficult to find two-word URLs, especially if they're common words. So one-word URLs is, you're going to be very hard-pressed to get one of those. And if you do, you're going to have to probably pay a ton of money for it. Two-word URLs, if they're common words at all, at this point, almost every combination of two-word URLs is taken, unless they're super random words that maybe don't flow or aren't connected. Sometimes you can find a nice two-word URL, and you may have to pay a little bit more money, but it might not break the bank. For example, I started a business called Lime Boost. And the reason I picked that name is the URL was available. I had to pay $300 for it instead of the regular $15 or $10 that these URLs cost. But it was worth it to me because I really liked the name, it flowed, and it wasn't in use yet. So, is the URL available? Another thing to consider with URLs is whether it's a .com or .net, it can be advantageous to have a .com because that's what people kind of assume is going to be at the end if they weren't paying attention. My personal website is michaeltobian.net. .net happened to be available and I went and took it. So I need to be clear when I'm giving out my URL that it's .net. And it's a little bit annoying, but it's not a big deal. The third consideration in picking your name is scalability. So you want to be able to grow your business, probably, if you have interest in doing that. And sometimes your name can give you some limitations on how you're going to grow. So here's some examples. Location. Is your business location dependent? I live in Utah. Let me give you an example. I have a business called Utah Live Bands. That we produce entertainment for weddings, corporate events, concerts, things like that. I called it Utah Live Bands because I wanted it to sort of exude this authority that we are the premier source of entertainment in Utah. Well, as we've grown, we produce events all over the world. We're in Europe, we're producing events in South America, all over the country, and it's kind of a problem having this name Utah Live Bands, because if I'm calling somebody in Florida and I'm saying, hey, we'd like to produce your event, and they say, oh, your name is Utah Live Bands? Well, we're in Florida. And I got to explain, no, we produce events all over the world. So I had to, at one point, actually get a different name for my business called dancebands.com. And so now when I talk to people outside of Utah, I have to use dancebands.com. And when I'm talking to people inside of Utah, I use Utah Live Bands. And honestly, if I had to go back and redo picking my name, I would not have done Utah Live Bands because of that reason. I just had no idea we were going to grow so much. Another thing that's interesting about this name we're going to talk about later is I changed it to Utah Live Bands for name scalability reasons, but I didn't change it scalable enough. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute in another point. So how location dependent is your business? And do you want to associate your name with that central location? Another thing is in terms of scalability is your industry. You may be in a particular industry. Do you want to stay in that industry? Or do you want to start offering services in other industries? Do you want to get into retail, service industries, different things like that? Are you in a particular specific industry? Maybe you're in the entertainment industry or the HVAC industry. Do you want to start offering other services? Well, your name can pigeonhole you a little bit to where people are going to say, well, why would I hire somebody that has a business, a plumbing business, to shovel my sidewalks? Okay, well, maybe you had expanded into shoveling sidewalks from your plumbing business. So you might want to consider, what other industries will I be in? Service limitations, which kind of goes with the industries. Are you going to start offering more services, and are you pigeonholing your services but then by the name you chose? Okay, so scalability. All right, the fourth thing to consider is whether or not you want to attach your personal name to the business. There can be pros and cons to doing this. Sometimes people say their name business. For example, when I started my booking agency production company that I had mentioned earlier, it was originally called Michael Tobian Ensembles and Bands. Well, I ended up changing it to Utah Live Bands, and I'll talk about that in a sec. So there's pros and cons in attaching your personal name to the company that you set up. The pros, maybe you have a name that brings a lot of value. So maybe you are well known in the industry, or you have some kind of celebrity status, or your name brings along some kind of added value. Well, that might be a reason to associate your name to the business. Maybe you have personal relationships that are strong, where that might add some value. Maybe another thing that is interesting is sometimes if you attach your name to the business, it can give your business kind of a small time feel. People like shopping from mom and pop shops, and they like sometimes supporting these smaller businesses. Well, if you can have that feel, then it can be advantageous in terms of marketing. It also can hurt you if you're trying to scale and if you're trying to not have that small time feel. So cons, like I was talking about my personal situation, it can affect your scalability, and it can affect the exit strategy that you might have if you want to sell your business one day. People may not want to buy a business that has your personal name attached to it. Sometimes people do, Oftentimes they don't. I know a business that's called Bernie's, and then it's the particular business that he has. And he bought that business, and his name's not Bernie, but every time I used him, I called him Bernie for like 2 years, and that wasn't his actual name. I think he runs into that a lot. So sometimes people do buy businesses that have other people's names attached to it, but it does present a challenge. So like I was saying before, I had a company called Michael Tobian Ensembles and Bands. And I realized one day I may want to sell this, or I might want to grow it into something bigger. And I changed it to Utah Live Bands for that reason. Well, as you live, you learn. And I learned that Utah Live Bands, I wasn't thinking big enough and it wasn't scalable enough. So then I had to get dancebands.com as another name to use. So we're using 2 different names. And it's fine, but it's a burden. And if I had to redo it all, I would have changed it to Something Productions that was totally unrelated that was totally not location dependent, and it didn't have my name attached to it. But right now we've built so much reputation with that name, I can't dump that name. I can only use a different name when we're talking to people out of state. So that's number 4, is your personal name attached to it or not? I'm not telling you which direction to go, I'm just telling you those are things to consider. Finally, and this is my 5th point, sometimes people overthink this whole thing, especially when it comes to the energy and the vibe of your name being associated with your business. People sit there and go, okay, and they think of a million names and they go, I don't know, that doesn't quite have the right energy or quite have the right feel I'm going for. With this type of a thought process is important, but it's not that important usually. Don't overthink this kind of stuff. Because when you go out and you run your business and you provide a better service than everybody else, or you have better products than everybody else, you are going to get a reputation for quality. And your name is going to be branded as you go along. And whatever name you pick is going to stand for quality. So you will kind of brand that name. If it's not the best name, it's going to become a good name because you're going to be associated with it. Think of all the good companies that you know that have really grown. A lot of them have bad names. I remember when Google came out, we were using search engines like Alta Vista and Ask Jeeves and stuff like that, and Yahoo. Yahoo's another one. I thought Google, man, what a dumb name for a search engine. Well, it's turned into a definition of a word. You Google things. Now Google is completely associated with excellent service. It's taken over the world, and it's a household name, and it's a good name because it's different, it's kind of funny, but it's sort of branded itself as to what it is. So don't overthink things like this. So, I've come up with names and just thought and stewed about things for hours and days, and I've come up with names like that. I had a band, as a country band that I started for corporate events and stuff, and we took some pictures of the band, and I said to the photographer, I said, what's like the first thing that comes to your head in terms of what this band name should be? And he didn't even think about it, and he said, Drive. I said, why Drive? He says, I don't know, it's the first thing that came to my head. And I went, okay, we're calling it Drive. So I have a country band called Drive, and I think it's a great name. And the band does a great job, excellent musicians. It's a band that does a lot of corporate events, and it's quite popular, and we have branded that name Drive. Drive stands for something excellent. Finally, I'll just say that you're going to learn this stuff as you go. I've made mistakes with names, like I've mentioned, and I've kind of learned. Hopefully I've given you some shortcuts, though, today so that you'll avoid that to some extent. Good luck with picking your name, and thanks for watching. I would encourage you to subscribe if you'd like more tips going forward as you get your business going. Thanks, and have a good day.